Guderian's panzers strike south as the Bryansk front moves to block the path. Hundreds of thousands of Red Army troops from the southwestern front are caught in a developing pocket between the Desna and Dnipro rivers near Kyiv. Tensions run high from Berlin to Moscow, as commanders and dictators debate the next move. One opts for a bold stroke, the other believes too much ground has been lost. The Red Army must now stand and face the Wehrmacht before Kyiv. Last week, the fighting in Army Group Center's sector stalled due to exhaustion. Hitler ordered Guderian to turn south into Ukraine, while Hot supported Army Group North. This week, we cover the final days of August, as the Bryansk front desperately tries to stop Guderian from encircling the southwestern front. We'll follow events from August 25th to 31st. First, let's look at the state of the Red Army in the field, after more than 2 months of some of the most intense combat ever witnessed in military history. Every week, we release 3 new exclusive videos for our members and patrons. The Pacific War, the Eastern Front of World War II Prelude, and many other series, including the War of Spanish Succession, Punic Wars, Iberian Reconquista, Russian Revolution and Civil War, North African and Italian campaigns of World War II, and much more. It has been long overdue, but we have finally created a YouTube channel exclusively for our Kings and Generals podcasts. Please go and check out Kings and Generals podcast, home to the Pacific War Week by Week podcast and the Fall and Rise of China podcast, link in the description and pinned comment. To see those, as well as get access to our exclusive Discord, see our schedule, and get early access to all videos, join the ranks of our patrons and YouTube members via the links in the description and pinned comment. Thanks to our supporters for allowing us to continue doing our dream job. German sources estimate that by the end of August 1941, they had captured approximately 872,000 prisoners of war. This represented an enormous cost to the Red Army. The frontline strength in the West on June 22nd had been almost 2.7 million men. This meant that 33% of the Western Red Army had become prisoners of war in 9 weeks of fighting. When combined with the estimated dead and wounded, the numbers become even more grim. There is much debate about the reliability of various numbers, but the lowest credible number is that 1.4 million Red Army soldiers died either fighting or from wounds sustained from June 22nd to August 31st. Another 680,000 were wounded but did not succumb to their wounds. The total casualties then as a percentage of the Red Army in the West as it stood at the start of Operation Barbarossa was 109%. Few campaigns could compare to this level of defeat and devastation. In the First World War, the Imperial Russian Army mobilized 16 million soldiers and counted 9 million casualties, including prisoners of war, in the 4 years of the war. Here, in just over 2 months, the Red Army had lost nearly a third of that war's casualties. This cannot be seen as anything less than an unmitigated disaster for the Red Army and the men and women of the Soviet Union. Here, in the western reaches of the USSR, war was hell as it had never been before. The prisoners of war faced a gruesome fate. The Nazi bureaucracy was reporting that some of the Red Army prisoners were receiving a daily ration of around 100 grams of bread. This absurdly low ration was systemically employed to kill as many of the prisoners as they could without bullets. The Nazis knew that they needed to keep their population well fed, and Germany was facing a minor food crisis as it was. In order to keep the calorie levels for German citizens at the desired levels, food had to be imported from the conquered East. There was little to spare for the prisoners of war. Nazi leaders questioned the usefulness of even providing this little amount. It has been estimated that fewer than 1 in 3 prisoners of war would survive the year in German captivity. The new forces mobilized to this point had brought the operational strength of the Red Army on all fronts to around 6.7 million men. The initial quality of these forces was poor, but they were getting better with every encounter. Most of this was due to increased experience at the tactical unit leader level, but there must have been surviving non-commissioned and junior officers bringing some understanding to the lowest levels of the fighting. The infantry, as in all wars, had done the majority of the fighting and dying. However, the armor and artillery branches of the Red Army had suffered proportionately to their comrades in the infantry. Every single mechanized corps had been destroyed as a fighting force even before the Stavka could carry out the planned disbandment of them. The Wehrmacht was in better shape, to be sure. They had taken far fewer casualties in every single battle of the war. This did not mean that there were still no issues with manpower at the front. The Heer had never been large enough to accomplish the objectives of its leaders. They had known this, but still managed to convince themselves otherwise. If they moved decisively, they could defeat the Red Army in the western reaches of the Soviet Union. This would mean they no longer needed to advance on a continuous line across the entire breadth of the country. By the end of August, this was starting to look like a fool's errand. Holder had admitted as early as the beginning of the month that the Nazi war machine had underestimated the size of the Red Army and the Soviet state's resilience. We will save an in-depth look at the Wehrmacht for a later video. The last week of August was relatively calm in the middle of the front. Zhukov and Timoshenko had to pause their battering of Army Group Center around Smolensk in order to reorganize and rehabilitate their forces for another push. Army Group Center was in no position to attack, having had Guderian and Hoth's panzers stripped from the command to aid the other two army groups in their own faltering offensive efforts. Zhukov was bold enough to ask the Stavka to give him yet more forces from the strategic reserve. Somewhat surprisingly, he was given them. Stalin was usually not keen on reinforcing failure, but perhaps he realized that Zhukov was his best field commander at the moment. He needed to give Zhukov better odds to break Army Group Center. It is unclear what promises were made, but Zhukov was sure he could take Yelna. Perhaps he convinced the dictator he could break the Germans at the small town, thereby forcing a strategic breakthrough in the center. Either way, he was given the extra men he asked for. He would not resume his offensive until August 13th, and he spent the week getting his men into position. At Velikye Luki, the Germans had the garrison encircled by the 24th of August. After 2 days of attempting to hold them off, the Red Army commanders decided on a breakout attempt. Ishakov's 22nd Army and Colonel Yakovlev's 48th Tank Division had been greatly reduced by the weeks-long fighting for the city, but they decided they had to fight their way out of the city. On August 26th, the breakout began. After more vicious fighting, Yakovlev made it out with only 2 tanks and 2,400 men. The rest of the 22nd Army was captured. The leader of the German assault, General Stumme, took 25,000 soldiers prisoner with his panzers. When Timoshenko discovered that Yakovlev had abandoned the city, he ordered him to turn around and retake it. This was a sure sign that the absurd disconnect between the Red Army's highest leaders and the actual situation on the ground had not been resolved. Yakovlev's force was a ragtag band of survivors, not a military force ready for offensive action. Demonstrating great personal bravery, he refused Timoshenko's orders. He was arrested and shot. Still, Yakovlev had proven that solid tactical leadership was capable of wielding the Red Army as a deadly weapon against the Germans. He had taken an understrength tank division with no more than an actual regiment's worth of vehicles and retaken a city with strong infantry defenders. It took 2 panzer divisions and the attention of the entire Wehrmacht to root him out. He received for his skill only the assassin's thanks. In the north, Manstein had crushed Vatutin's attack at Lake Ilmen and inflicted hard losses on the Red Army by the beginning of this week. At the main effort on the Luga line, the Red Army was crumbling. The approaches to Leningrad were taking a toll on the advancing Germans, but still they advanced. Even in their weakened state after losing Manstein's force to the counterattack at Lake Ilmen, the advance on Leningrad continued. On August 24th, the city of Luga fell. It appeared that the pause before the resumption of the offensive had done Army Group North well, and the Soviets little. There was still some resistance in front of the city, and Army Group North would run into roadblocks as they crossed the Luga River. The Red Army's last armor in the area was under the command of Major General Baranov. His 1st Tank Division was the last best hope for the defense of the city. Unfortunately, he was being worn down. He had decided sometime in the last week to avoid major engagements and husband his resources in smaller delaying actions. These platoon-sized attacks did the job, allowing smart small unit leaders to pick situations that gave them the advantage of numbers, positioning and preparation. The 8th Panzer Division was finally recovered from its thrashing at Soltsi and reinserted into the fray. Here again it was given a black eye and something to think about. Lieutenant Kolobanov led a small platoon of KV-1s in the defense of Krasnogvardeysk, where he destroyed something like 40 German tanks. The defense of the city continued through the end of the month. To the east, the battle to encircle the city was continuing, as the panzers of General Schmidt's 39th Panzer Corps advanced from the south. After they cut the main Leningrad-Moscow rail line, they advanced towards Magyar. That town was the center of the last working rail junction that served Leningrad. On August 30th, the town fell to the men of the 12th Panzer Division. Leningrad was now isolated. It would remain so until 1944. The siege of the city was not underway just yet, but Leningrad was cut off from the outside world. After this was accomplished, Lieb and Hauptner considered whether it was possible to take the city in an assault. This decision was debated. It was argued that the panzers had taken Minsk, Smolensk, and other smaller cities and towns without much trouble. If they moved quickly in force, they might be able to overwhelm the defenders of Leningrad in the same manner. It was agreed that they would try. This effort would be delayed until the middle of September, as the fighting at Krasnogvardeysk was still holding back the main effort of the army group. Stalin and Hitler were captivated by the beginning of the drama that was Guderian's drive south. No one could help but understand that stopping him would mean an end to the war of maneuver. The attrition war was already happening east of Smolensk, and it would only be a matter of weeks before Army Group North and the Northwestern Front settled into a slogging match of equal proportions. All of the hopes of the Stavka were pinned on Lieutenant General Eremenko. He took command of the Bryansk front and put together a plan to stop the impetuous Panzer General. Guderian's assault began on the 25th of August and was led by Schweppenberg's 24th Panzer Corps. The corps was in reduced strength, as the 4th Panzer and the 10th Infantry Divisions were still assembling in the jump-off areas. Guderian and Schweppenberg decided to push ahead with just the 3rd Panzer Division, under Lieutenant General Model. On the morning of the 26th, the forward battle group of the division managed to seize a massive bridge over the Desna River at the town of Novgorod-Seversky. Model was leading from the front and was on site within hours of the bridge's capture. Unfortunately for him, the Red Army responded to its loss by trying to destroy it with artillery fire. They did not manage to destroy the bridge, but they killed one of the regimental commanders and wounded Model. The weather delayed Schweppenberg as he tried to bring up his latecomers. Model's division was not strong enough on its own to break out across the river. Guderian had planned the attack well enough, focusing Model onto the gap between the 13th and 21st Armies. But the Soviets reacted quickly to the assault and repositioned their forces as best as possible under the circumstances. The Stavka released the 40th Army to Eremenko. He attempted to get its men into position in front of the crossing before Schweppenberg could reinforce Model. The 10th Infantry was next to push across the river. The fighting was vicious and the outnumbered Germans were forced back. Lieutenant General Loper was unable to hold his positions in the face of the Soviet counterattacks and pulled his men back across the bridge. It appeared that Eremenko was managing his task well. He asked for and received support from the VVS. Masses of DB-3 tactical bombers were sent into the area on interdiction raids during the last 3 nights of the month. Unfortunately, they were unable to cause much damage to Schweppenberg's men as he attempted to concentrate them for a breakout across the river. The VVS was still suffering from poor coordination and inadequate pilot training, among the myriad other issues resulting from the chaos of the first months of the invasion. The Second Army had been called up from the Theatre Reserve and supported the assault on Gomel. Now it was tasked with taking Chernihiv on Guderian's right flank. The advance was stalled by stiff resistance from the Soviet Third Army. This delay allowed Eremenko to attack the exposed flanks of Schweppenberg's corps. The Stavka attempted to reinforce this advantage throughout the coming days, but their attacks were clumsy and poorly planned. As the week progressed, Schweppenberg was able to collect his forces and prepare for a proper combined push across the Desna. By August 30th, he was in position. Guderian wanted him to move faster, but as the assault by the 10th Infantry had shown, Schweppenberg needed time. Guderian pestered Bock for more men. Bock was still trying to hold the line under assault by Timoshenko. Although the Yelna salient had quieted, Bock was under no illusions to Zhukov's plans for it. Army Group Center was being stressed to the breaking point, and its commander had no patience for the prima donna panzer commander. He did, however, understand that the sooner Guderian's mission was accomplished, the sooner Hitler would consent to reinforcing Army Group Center. Only with Hitler's consent would he be allowed to resume the drive on Moscow. So he relented to Guderian and promised him on August 30th that the Grossdeutschland Infantry Regiment would be dispatched to his command. He also allowed the SS Division Reich to be transferred to Guderian. Bock attempted to delay the transfer of the last unit for a while in order to continue to use it on his lines. Army Group South was not permitted to sit idly by while Guderian drove south. The plan called for Kleist to drive across the Dnipro and hook around Kyiv from the south. The exact meeting point of the two panzer groups was not set in stone, but the intention was to encircle the bulk of the southwestern front behind Kyiv to the east. The 17th Army would support Kleist as he advanced across the river. They attacked across the river in the last week of the month, gaining reasonable bridgeheads. The Stavka tried to replicate the success of the 40th Army further north. They formed the 38th Army and set it in similar blocking positions across the Wehrmacht's Dnipro bridgeheads. Unfortunately, the Luftwaffe was more active here, and close air support pounded the raw recruits of the 38th Army. Still, by the end of the month, resistance to Kleist's breakout was stiff enough to convince Rundstedt of the need to pull the 48th Panzer Corps out of its developing positions. Still, by the end of the month, resistance to Kleist's crossing at Dnipropetrovsk was stiff enough to convince Rundstedt of the need to halt the Panzer Group's offensive at Dnipropetrovsk. Instead, they would withdraw off the line as much as possible in preparation for a later offensive through the 17th Army's positions. North of Kyiv, the 6th Army under Reichenau was struggling. On August 25th, the 111th Infantry Division was forced to abandon its bridgehead across the Dnipro. The Soviet 5th Army was holding the line well, but as Guderian and Weichs advanced from the north, it was forced to extend its positions. Hellyer was unsure of how strongly the Southwestern Front was going to hold the line. He assumed that the Stavka could see what was happening as Guderian continued to drive south. It was only a matter of time before the pincers closed and the entire Southwestern Front would be trapped. The reasonable course of action would be to avoid a massive encirclement. Kiepanos needed authorization to abandon Kyiv and reform his lines behind the Dnipro River. This was out of the question for Stalin. He demanded that Kiepanos stay in position and defend the city. This concludes our discussion for this week. Next week, we will continue the week-by-week account of the entire war on the Eastern Front. From July 1941 to May of 1945, we will track the war's progress. Stay tuned and remember, this is just the beginning of the weekly Eastern Front of World War II series. Don't forget to subscribe, comment and share this video. It helps immensely. We have started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.